All right, people. We actually did it. Somehow, some way, thank you to the fans, we made it, because we're talking about the Snyder Cut tonight, people. That's all I got to say. I'm not going to talk too much. You guys know the drill. I'm Dom the movie nerd. That's Chris the TV nerd. We got some guests on tonight, and we're going to be talking about this 4-hour-long monstrosity of whether it lived up to the hype. Chris, just to briefly let the people know, do you think this lived up to the hype?
I'm just going to tell them what we just said in the pre-chat. You said I seem relaxed tonight, and all I'm going to say is when my heroes are handled properly, I have no stresses at all.
All right.
So
well,
we'll crack that egg a little further because it's not quite as black and white as that statement, but for the next hour, and so don't worry, we're going to get into all of it, guys.
Well, guys, all I'm going to say then is hopefully that tells you guys all that you need to know for all of you guys that only click on the videos and then click out immediately. So stay tuned for our thoughts on the Snyder Cut of Justice League. All right, we got Christian Evenko, we got Matt from Basic Entertainment, we got Professor Pat Huber in a surprise appearance. And people, before we actually get into the conversation, I had to ask one thing, just one thing. Is this the most amount of social media attention that, forget movies, just a property in general has gotten in recent memory? And before you guys answer that, I need to preface it with this. It can't be related to a Marvel thing because when Endgame came out, we were kind of already at that point, right, where the last 4 or 5 movies that they'd put out prior to Endgame were already building up. If I'm being completely honest, I have not seen this much social media hype for something since the first season of Stranger Things 5 years ago, So, because I was scrolling through my Facebook for 3 days straight, and I just saw nothing but this stuff. So I gotta pose that question to all three of you guys first before we actually start breaking down this monstrosity of a thing.
Yeah, I think it is pretty hyped. It rightfully so. I mean, the more we learned about the situation as it unfolded, there was so many emotional ties with this story where it's not only did Snyder get this taken away from him, we then learn about a tragedy he suffers. And then we learn about how Joss Whedon was really kind of the savior of Justice League, if you think about it, because he still had to meet that deadline so the big boss guy could get his bonus. He barely could change anything because they didn't give him enough appropriate time, and yet he still made a movie that was decent, and I respect that a lot, actually, looking at it. So there's just so many variables here that I don't think, at least in our lifetime, any other movies really had. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, Matt, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, the whole release of Snyder Cut movie was huge. They were putting billboards up in Comic-Con, pushing for it. The fans won here. The fans actually won, and we took down a big studio, an ignorant one as well, too, Warner Bros. For a bunch of morons.
But I see your sentiment.
They're a bunch of morons, and they're still continuing the moron-like traits of them. This right here is a movie is worth to be talked about. This is one of the greatest ensemble comic book movies of all time.
Damn,
some
high praise.
Better than some we have seen in the previous years. But we'll get into that.
All right, Pat.
Okay.
What's it called? Ever the hyperbolist, people. Matt from Basic Entertainment. Pat. What again, just the social media discourse on this thing. I mean, even as somebody who doesn't, I would say, is not as, ear to the ground as the rest of us are when it comes to this stuff. Even you had to have heard, some of the rumblings about this thing.
Well, let me just tell you, this was not announced on C-SPAN at all. I didn't see any.
So it makes sense. Okay. Makes sense.
Anybody, pundits coming on and talking about it. But, I would say that, I think I was totally in a wait and see mode. And I feel like I'm probably part of that crowd that was okay, I kind of went to the theater for the, first go around. And now they're going to give us the Snyder Cut finally. And it's, okay, I'm ready for it. I'm going to take a look at it and check it out and see what changes. So I was kind of on the down low hyped, but yeah, it's just a movie, so I'm not going to dedicate my life around it. So it was the first opportunity I got to sit down for 4 hours. I took it and went for the ride. Although that's pretty hard to, fit a 4-hour movie into a time slot.
It is true. It is true.
Yeah,
I think the irony of that statement is the fact that so many people now have dedicated their lives around movies, but the actual importance of movies in our culture has decreased drastically, which again, I think is part of the reason why this movie making as big a stink as it did is so meaningful and so much more impactful. And it's actually going to bring me to another point that I'll get into later in this conversation. But Chris, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say two things. First of all, what up to every single person in the chat right now, Jane, Luke, and everyone else watching. We're very happy you guys are here. We have one hell of a show for you tonight, and I think that's already sort of spoken for itself. But Pat, you told me you liked this over texting. You're coming into this. It feels almost a little more salty than I would imagine Aquaman is after a swim.
Ooh, people, just so you know, the puns are only beginning. The puns are only beginning. So if you don't want to hear any more Chris's shitty puns, tune out now.
That was like a bit of a mixed statement, man. I'm confused by that.
Oh, no. I was all for the saltwater taffy. And, I actually enjoyed this movie. To give you a quick, rundown on it. But, for the most part, I was, burned hardcore with the original release. I was kind of hyped. I loved Batman versus Superman. I was like, yeah, I kind of like a dark Batman. And it had its flaws. I'll give you that. But it was something different. It was not Marvel. It was darker. It had its own take on superheroes. And, I'm an action film guy, and the superhero sort of genre has taken over that genre. So it's like I'm sort of along for the ride here. It's not my favorite thing to jump into superheroes, but DC was offering me something a little bit different. And so I kind of latched onto that. And then Justice League, I remember the Thursday night it was coming out, I offered a bunch of people like, hey, you want to go watch this? Let's get some justice tonight. And pretty much everyone turned me down.
Wow.
And then I went into the theater.
Way, I mean,
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, we are
really on a roll here.
Yeah, I went into the theater, and it was me in the back row, and then it was one couple, like 6 rows up. So it was basically kind of like I was the third wheel watching this movie.
that's amazing.
So, man, this is throwing me back to 2019. I've missed these types of stories.
Yeah, so my original feeling of this movie was there was a lot more disappointment going on than what I was seeing on the screen in the original cut.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, so that was actually the next point that I really wanted to get into, right? So obviously, I feel like everyone is familiar with the troubled history around this movie and the actual making and what went into the initial cut that we got versus this cut now. So I've got a little bit of a unique stance in the sense of I was a little bit the opposite of Pat. I hated Batman versus Superman with a burning passion to the point where it actually became part of like a little bit of the, I don't even know what you'd call it, Chris, but let's just say Chris used it in order to poke my buttons many, many times when the movie first came out, we first met in college. And so needless to say, I'm not going to say I was stoked at the initial cut of Justice League, but I was definitely just happy to have something different than Batman vs. Superman and Man of Steel and just the initial Snyder misery that we've been forced to deal with in those last couple months. So like, I don't want my statements on this movie to reflect as anything like just me vindicating Snyder's previous work. I still have my thoughts on Man of Steel. I still hate Batman vs. Superman with a burning passion, right? So I wanted you guys to kind of break down like kind of your thoughts going into the last one, kind of your thoughts on the Snyder movement as it's progressed, because obviously, again, with the psycho fans doing what they do, obviously, because again, we live in the age now where if you watch 5 comic book movies and you're on the internet, you're now an expert in movies. I wanted to know your guys' thoughts on kind of like the trip here, right? Because again, this really is an instance where the story behind the movie, and Chris and I, you and I have been talking about a lot about this these last couple of weeks, where the story behind the movie always seems to just mean more to people and just be more interesting than the actual movie itself. But this might be the first instance where the story of the movie is the behind the scenes of how it got made. So like, I guess I'll start on Chris. We can start with you because we were not together when we watched this. You were back home. I was up at school. I watched this by myself the first time I watched it. After I came out of it, I'm like, okay, that was fun. It was kind of cool, you know? DC had already, as far as my mind, crashed and burned a long time ago with the doubleheader of Batman vs. Superman and Suicide Squad. How you come back from a double drop like that, I have no idea. But the fact that they did just, tells you something about just their never-ending train of constantly outstupiding their last move. But then this comes out. I'm kind of fine with it. I'm like, okay, I had something that I got a couple laughs with and didn't have to think that hard about. And everyone else is acting like this is like the coming of the Antichrist. Like how poorly received that initial movie was. So like, kind of walk me through your guys' thoughts on that initial cut after it came out, and kind of like, whether like any rumblings of the Snyder cut, like just walk me through your guys' process there.
Sure, yeah. So I was with friends of the show who have been on the show quite a few times, the Cerulli twins. And our whole crew, Johnny Manna as well, who's been on the show. And none of us really knew the drama, to be honest with you, at that point in time. We just were kind of like, hey, man, like, let's go see a movie. It's Friday night, and what else are we going to do? And I remember we all liked it, but it was like one of those films where, when you hang out with people all the time, there are certain things that continue in the conversation from the first experience together, and there are others that don't necessarily make for a bad evening, but don't really come back. Like, unfortunately, hanging out with that friend group, the amount of times I had to hear the same opinion on Endgame was almost suffocating.
Especially for you, I'm sure.
Especially for me. Whereas this movie certainly just came and went. And that wasn't to say that I didn't like it, but I was definitely more of a fan of Batman vs. Superman, specifically because of the way that Batman is portrayed. And it really sucks that we'll never get a Batfleck movie, because I really would go for that. But so this to me wasn't a step backwards. It wasn't a departure. It was just a step sideways into a more safer route, this Whedon cut. And I kind of felt there might have been some writing on the walls for formulaic Marvel future films to come. And of course, the DCEU just got so chopped up after that I don't even though we have more films, I don't know if there is a formula, someone show it to me. If there even is a thought process, someone show it to me. We'll get into that later, but
I feel like that's the I feel that's a more accurate term there.
Right. So I'll hand it over to Matt, but I'll conclude with this. It was just kind of one of those films that came and went, but I didn't hate it.
So, it's my time? Okay.
Yes.
My kind of hype around the whole Justice League was kind of because I was kind of like with Dom. The theatrical cut of BVS didn't have me jumping for joy. I was kind of mid on it. I was kind of whatever. Ultimate cut helped it, but still, even that, it's not the best one out of this little trilogy he's created, Snyder. But I remember hearing, of course, I'm more of a comic book fan. I remember hearing that Josh Whedon is going to come in and do reshoots. And I was kind of excited, right? I was kind of excited. He's like, yeah, he came out from doing Avengers. He has some, he's all what he's doing, around that time. Suicide Squad came out, trash, BVS, not really hyped. So going in, watching Justice League, it was a piece of shit. When I was there watching it, it was a piece of shit. And I was telling myself, it was the scene with Superman and Batman, right? When he grabbed him, he says, "Do you bleed?" And, that whole line, you can see the horrible CGI mustache. I was like telling myself, what the fuck am I doing here? Like, this is garbage. Like, this is trash. The CGI is bad. It doesn't follow up from the previous movie. They're all cracking jokes, all cracking cheesy jokes. It's like a horrible...
Bad jokes, too, we like to add.
It was trying to be an MCU movie, but not a good one. And I kind of tell myself, Warner Bros., they think we're idiots, They're demasculating everyone. I mean, Wonder Woman got... flash on her boobs, like it was just horrible. Everyone got cut off in the movie, and watching this, it makes me even hate that movie even more. But yeah,
that scene in particular, especially since it was a rip from Age of Ultron, MCU movie that I love, but I will fully admit is not one of the stronger movies. That part in particular definitely did not age well. Pat, so your thoughts after you watched Justice League initially?
After watching the original cut of this film, the only thing I was doing for 6 months was hoorah, right? Because Aquaman had all those kind of like bro type of nuances in his character throughout the movie. And, spoiler here, if you didn't watch the Snyder cut, I think maybe one time he gets a little jock-like in this movie. And all the 50 times it happened in the original are edited out. So I think that, is just one little example of just like how things in the Whedon cut were not necessarily refined. It was sort of just like, hey, let's throw a bunch of paint on the canvas and call it art. But I think in this cut, you basically get just a little more logic behind the decisions. You're not looking for sort of popcorn flip tropes to get people excited, like one character that's just screaming out hoorah, and getting you pumped. I think a lot of the characterization is a little more nuanced in this 4-hour rendition of it.
Right, which is so funny because you never really think of a movie needing that much time and space in order to actually tell a story, right? And that was kind of the biggest thing, obviously, with kind of the initial problem before Snyder even left the product is Snyder turned in this cut, And obviously, again, the studio was in the first of many, many times that they would be in full-on panic mode because of the overwhelming negative reception of Batman vs. Superman and Suicide Squad. Wonder Woman, I think, had yet to come out. So he turns in this cut, and it's 4 hours long. And they're, first off, just off the bat, they're like, fuck no. Because this is 4 hours long. Second of all, I can understand some of their trepidation because, again, a large part of the negative reaction to those first couple of movies was because of just the tone in general, and just, again, just people just didn't want that from the superhero movies. I not necessarily so much of the tone, but more so because I personally thought that the tone was not well executed, and I thought that what I was watching for the story did not substantiate the tone, and everything that he was trying to go for with his statements on superheroes was just getting completely undercut by just bullshit after bullshit after bullshit. And I'm like, oh my God, what is this? Like, who cares about any of this stuff? And I think that's probably why the most surprising thing about watching this cut was, for lack of a better word, how lighthearted it was. And kind of like, oh my God, is this like the first Snyder movie where these guys like actually feel like human beings and not just like emo guys that are like standing on the rooftop in the middle of the moon, like looking out and feeling sorry for themselves because they don't have anyone else that can relate to them, you know, specifically in the Christian Bale from the Nolan movies Batman voice. And so you can imagine my surprise when I saw, I'm like, oh my God, these guys are like actually acting like real human beings and are like actually like trying to bond with each other, and there's actual arcs here, and they actually have some character, and the villains are actually not only besides like 1,000 times more visually interesting, but actually kind of cool. And the apocalyptian like kind of social structure is, and I learned way more about apocalyptian politics in this movie than I ever like thought I would imagine. So like that immediately was a surprise to me. But so after kind of like going through all that and understanding, it's like, okay, so they wanted a shorter movie, but also they wanted something drastically different tonal wise. Then everything that happens with Snyder's daughter happens, and again, like, that's a tragedy beyond which anyone should have to deal with. Like, that is just probably, as far as, like, top 5 worst things that could ever happen to a human being, that's gotta be up there. You know, just, well, you know, obviously with his daughter committing suicide and everything. Like, that's gotta be up there. So, obviously, again, it's safe to say the man had a lot on his plate. So, rightfully so, he left the project. And DC brings on Whedon, and their whole goal, that right, they're in panic, they're in full reset mode. They're like, look, guy, it's essentially exactly what happened with J.J. Abrams with The Rise of Skywalker. They're like, look, we need you to get this done in like 2 weeks or whatever, and get these reshoots done. Just make the Avengers. Just get it under 2 hours, and make the Avengers. Just make it lighthearted, make it fun. And he's like, okay, cool. He drastically changes the shape of Steppenwolf. Not only does he do these reshoots that look bad in general, but he also just adds all of these bad jokes. Like, all of these, like, really bad, just forget not funny, just some of them kind of tasteless, some of them just pointless, some of them just completely just do what jokes are not supposed to do and just cause the movie to come to a grinding halt, like in the middle. Like, to me, I think the moment, if I'm remembering correctly, it's been 3-4 years since I've seen it, but I think for me the biggest example, besides all the terrible Ezra Miller one-liners from that movie, is Aquaman like accidentally like admitting that he's like feeling scared or stuff when like he's touching the lasso, and then he finds out that he's touching the lasso, and I'm like, what the? And it's like right before they're about to go into this like super epic battle, and I'm like, wait, what the fuck is this? You know, like, so I guess it's just little moments like those that I wasn't really paying attention to, because I'm just like, oh my God, thank God this isn't Batman vs Superman, that kind of like make me realize, oh, maybe this wasn't as like kind of good. Like, again, I don't think it's a good movie by any stretch of the imagination, but just like maybe it's not as good as I remember it being, you know?
Yeah, totally. And you know, those are all really good points. I think I've never been a fan of that sort of humor in an action film. I mean, if I'm watching an action film, why do I want the intensity of the moment to be cut with, you know, some stupid joke that's A, trendy, and B, not going to age well at all? I mean, just go back and watch The Force Awakens, you know, that first scene where we meet Kylo and he has your favorite scene. The bullet held in front of Poe's face is just, it's really just disrespectful to film and audience's intelligence and so many other things that I don't really want to get into right now. You guys have heard me say it to death on this show, but really, like, the big thing for me with I guess the improvements, because it seems like that's sort of what we're kind of like eating our way into here, is the use of the characters and knowing your heroes. Like, Whedon obviously has successes on his hands, and of course he came in with literally the 11th hour of all 11th hours to get this thing done. So I really don't actually fault him too much, to be honest, because like the first Justice League, if I hadn't ever gotten the Snyder Cut, I would say is not the weakest point of the DCEU by far. So, I mean, honestly, the man worked with what he had, which was a very messy situation. And as Matt said earlier on, one of the alleged worst studios to work with as a director in Warner Brothers. To me, the improvements sort of come from, Zack Snyder seems like a guy who does his homework, whether you like his style or whether you don't, that doesn't matter, because at least there's never complaints about his characters not feeling like they're in, ancient Sparta, not feeling like they're, in New York City, sleazily walking around in this noir sort of thing. Like they always feel like they fit the environment he's in. He has a lot of slow motion. He does a lot of things that annoy a lot of people. He's very stylistic, sometimes to a fault. I get that, but I just don't think that he would have, sort of, and I don't know if he has, hated the Whedon version as much as some people have, because Whedon didn't have enough time to even give these characters a personality. And that's the biggest takeaway for me from this film, was the personality we now get to know from Ezra Miller's Flash, where I can actually justify not liking him in the role. Before it was just, oh, the suit doesn't look that good, and oh, he's kind of annoying, and why is he over-sexualizing everyone and everything that happens to him? But now it's like, oh, okay, I get to know him a little more, and yeah, he doesn't play the naive rookie role in the humble way that I like the Flash. So maybe some people like that, but for me personally, I don't like it. Either way, I can at least explain to you why I don't like it now. And so that's my biggest takeaway from this film, is being able to explain for the first time about this film, truly having this hindsight is 2020 thing of, okay, I have both cuts now, to sort of be like, oh, okay, so that was a tough, really, opinion that I had, because had I known this was coming down the pipeline, I wouldn't feel this way. And just the educated conversations we're able to have now, I think, are my biggest takeaways from the Snyder Cut. We can get into specifics, but...
And if I can just insert one thing real quick, I think the biggest thing for me just going into this movie that I wanted, that I think was accomplished, and that was the first indication that it's like, oh no, okay, so maybe the discourse around this is real, is I went into this being like, okay, if they waste my time and give me the exact same goddamn movie, just with more scenes added to puff it up to 4 hours, I'm going to be really pissed, Because that's the thing with director's cuts, is 90% of the time, director's cuts are just the same movie, just with extra deleted scenes added. Very rarely do we get a case where we actually feel like we're watching a completely different movie. Like, as much as I love the extra French segment in Apocalypse Now that's added to the Apocalypse Now Redux cut, it does not drastically alter the movie in any significant way. And you could say that about 90% of director's cuts. The only real one that I can think of where the movie is drastically changed by the extra scenes and the different cut is Ridley Scott's director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven, which is another movie that was widely known for having a disastrous theatrical run, but once the extended cut came out and those extra scenes and subplots were added, it significantly changed the movie. This is the first time that I've seen in recent memory that I can say that the second version of the movie actually felt like watching a completely different movie than the first time, which is something I can't say about anything else I've watched before.
Interesting. Yeah, if Patter, I don't want to, monopolize.
No, I just want to go off of Dom's Kingdom of Heaven and say that director's cut's probably one of the best movies ever made.
Oh, it's insane. It's unbelievable.
And then the funny thing is, Ridley Scott goes on to do Gods and Kings, which is a very interesting movie.
Oh my God. And what's even better is, what he said about why he cast white people in Egyptian parts, right?
No, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a quote that if I read it right now, it would immediately get us canceled, but wow. It is, man.
I guess go look it up on Google if you're interested.
Yeah. But you want to ruin Ridley Scott for yourself.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. What I will say about the Snyder Cut is after, investing the 4 hours and sort of going through it, some of the articles that I've been sort of reading have, been popping in and being, kind of saying, oh, I liked how I spent more time with each of the individual characters. And I do enjoy that as well. But I almost feel like this cut makes me see, in terms of the story, what is really the major flaw in the movie. And that's, I think we rely on Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman as sort of the characters that the audience is comfortable with. instead of taking this movie and making it like about Cyborg for a large portion of it. Cyborg is the one that basically has the ability to, manipulate the world at his whim, because he is now the robot, and tied into this the system. And he is also the one that basically comes up with the plan to break the Unity boxes at the end. And I really felt like, even though this is an ensemble movie, Cyborg should have actually been the linchpin of the entire movie, instead of just part of the ensemble. It should have really been his story, with all this other stuff going on around it. And, it's really about like how he's going to determine, if the bit is flipped or not. Is it 0 or 1? Does Darkseid take over? To go all computer science on you. But I feel like his story was probably one of the strongest ones that really should have anchored the film a lot more than it did.
No, you're totally right. And I think that sort of is exactly what I was trying to talk about. Like, we can at least have intelligent conversations about this film now because we have the original vision. And it's so, like, I don't, blame anyone because, when you're on YouTube, you got to make content. And people have been doing this, and it's a lot of people's living, sort of diving deep into these films. But I would be curious to see if there's some sort of honesty around the way that critics are sort of reflecting back on what they had said in the past about this film. Because if you could talk deeply about the Justice League cut, then you have to be able to write like a novel on the Snyder cut. And I just don't see too many people sort of acknowledging that, which is a little frustrating because, like, that's a great point, Pat. We could dissect that all night. Like, that is truly, it could have been a Cyborg origin film with sort of the trappings of a big team up film as well. I honestly, personally disagree with that sort of wanting it to be more Cyborg centric. I actually thought that they balanced it really well. And so, I'll pass it over to Matt now because he's hasn't really gotten a chance to chime in for a minute. I'm curious where his head's at with all this, but I just kind of wanted to like jump off that because I just think it's amazing that no one's talking about that perspective that this film gives. And it just kind of blows my mind. Like,
is the one great thing about this comic book movie is that it wants you wanting more of those side characters, right? Aquaman, you want to see where he goes. Of course, we got that. But I think Flash and Cyborg are like the key of this whole entire movie. I mean, what they do to Flash in this movie is so heroic. This is such a heroic movie. It's like more heroic than like the previous movies we have gotten. Like, Batman is starting to act different. You get development on him. Superman comes in like the most Superman way, right? But Cyborg in here plays it so like Ray Fisher does an amazing job of like capturing this guy who's like brokenhearted and he's kind of just thinking about one way, and his dad is kind of like thinking about what you can really do, and he's just kind of exploring that. And that whole sequence of Cyborg is it's great. It's really heartbreaking. I think this is a really heartbreaking kind of like a Memphis, like Snyder-ish stuff. And also too, like, all the characters in here they're a reason why they're here. I mean, maybe you can argue maybe Aquaman doesn't have too much in this movie, but I still want to see where he goes, right? And then the Flash is like, I came in here kind of like Chris. I wasn't a big fan of Ezra Miller's Flash. I'm still not sold as a good Barry Allen. I feel like he's more of a Wally West, a great Wally West. But Flash in here is heroic. I mean, that whole sequence is probably one of the best comic book scenes of all time. It's like good dialogue there, some good effects. And then Batman has like some good character development. He's starting to feel more like Batman, right? Because in BVS, he kind of felt like more like the Punisher in a way, right? So we got more development, and I just think, and Wonder Woman. I mean, I like this version more than like Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman 84 was going a more of a optimistic, happy. I'm not gonna punch you. I'm gonna grab you and toss you over here type Wonder Woman. This is a Wonder Woman that's going straight for your head, and I kind of like that. She's a warrior. So
let's be honest. Wonder Woman 84 was just trying to capitalize on this trend of everything having to be 80s.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
You can just tell when there's an artist in the room and when there's someone who's sort of pandering to like, what's happening right now in the zeitgeist, which is a big problem with a lot of my Marvel films. And Dom, I'll certainly hand it over to you after this point. But I think you said something really deep to me, at least, about Batman. You are seeing character development now, having Batman versus Superman, this more brooding, this more rough around the edges sort of angry guy who is doing the right thing, but maybe not for the right reasons. And sure, that's always been the core of Batman, but I think the way that Affleck progresses just from BVS to Justice League Snyder Cut, not original Justice League. I'm really not talking about the original one anymore unless it comes up again, just so the viewers know. But like his progression there and where we think it could go with that scene at the end, meeting Martian Manhunter and him sort of taking on the mantle of being the aggregator, the leader of the Justice League. It's really powerful because he doesn't even have his own movie in this universe. And so like it really just kills me that we're not going to get this Snyder vision unless, you know, magic happens again. But I think we got lucky enough getting this cut.
Well, I mean, if you want to go just based off that point, like 3 of these characters don't have their own movies yet because we haven't gotten the Flash movie. Cyborg is probably never going to get his own movie now after Ray Fisher's statements against Warner Brothers, and and Batman. So that's 3 characters that have not gotten their own characters. And Matt, I also just wanted to bounce off your point a little bit of where this movie actually makes you want to see the rest of these characters. As far as I'm concerned, I don't give a fuck about anything else that DC has planned going forward. I just want to see the rest of this movie. I never thought I would hear myself say this. Give me Justice League 2 and 3 because
give me more of the Snyder.
Because real quick, for anybody in our audience and just in general on this panel as well who have not read Snyder's treatment and outline that for the stuff that he had planned for Justice Leagues 2 and 3, do yourselves a favor, go and read it because it is some of the most insane stuff I've ever seen. That I couldn't even picture watching that stuff on screen, let alone just reading it on the page. It was fucking nuts. Matt knows what I'm talking about.
And you kind of want to talk about like comparing it to the MCU. This is not the MCU. Let Snyder do his own thing, right? Let him talk about, have a more darker tone, more realistic tone. I'm fine with that, And I think Warner Bros. They're still doing it. Like Aquaman, Wonder Woman, they feel like MCU movies. I want more of this.
And sorry to cut you off, but I am actually really glad that you brought that up because I think I've been coming to this conclusion for a while now. And again, it's taken me 5 years, right? Because 5 years ago, that was when Snyder had a chance to make his impact, obviously, with his verse, and then it just didn't. And then the MCU dominated and took over, and that basically ran superhero storytelling for the last before that, but really since 2016 was when they like, okay, no, now we're powerhouses. They just dominated the agenda, and eventually got to the point where Disney was just running everything. And Chris and I talked about this a little bit, and I actually brought this point up a couple of, I don't remember if it was a year ago or recently, but Chris knows what I'm talking about, which is that Snyder's style, when it comes to his movies, not just his superhero movies, but all of his movies, is so specific. That is why I am convinced that, forget every other filmmaker, just him specifically was the only chance that anybody had of actually competing with Marvel. And the minute that he was out, everything else was done. Sony was fucked, Fox was fucked, Warner Brothers was fucked. Everybody that dared, Universal with their dumb friggin' Dark Universe thing was fucked. Anybody that dared try to shut up. Anybody that dared try to actually make something that compete with Marvel was doomed to fail before they even start. And I don't want to make broad statements, but as you're seeing with this movie, Snyder has such a distinct tone and approach to these characters and this type of storytelling that is so different than anybody else's take, that he really was the only chance of giving the MCU some actual real competition. And we're seeing that happen in real time right now with the amount of real-time reactions that we're getting. Chris, as the biggest anti-MCU guy that we have here, come on, that's got to be pushing your buttons at least somewhat.
It's killing me, Dom. That's exactly the point. The problem, though, is, and let's be honest, let's speak to both sides.
Yep.
Snyder is very polarizing, and I know everyone loves to say
he was.
I'm not talking about as a person. I'm talking about as a filmmaker.
Right.
He has a very unique style that you either love or you hate. I mean, Watchmen is a great example. I'm sure that's partly why he got the job, because of how culty that movie has become in regards to people's just way they revere it. And I think rightfully so. That movie's right up my alley. But if the highest sitting movie of the I just read an article earlier before this podcast, and I know we all say that reviews don't matter and Rotten Tomatoes doesn't matter, and I know to us it doesn't, because we kind of are able to articulate and do what those people are doing, just in a different medium right here on YouTube. But to the majority, they do matter. And if the highest sitting DCEU film right now, I think, is this Snyder Cut at a 79,
I think
that's
so.
not very high.
Yeah,
that's really
not.
Because how many
highest
MCU
rated one
films are?
What was the highest rated one before this one? Was it Wonder? It had to have been Wonder Woman. It had to have been Wonder Woman and Man of Steel.
Shazam.
You're right. Shazam.
But I mean, they're only in the 70s, and if you think about how that impacts the consumer, it's just Snyder isn't
Right.
for everyone. But the problem is his vision is so good to people like us,
Yeah.
and it kills me, man. There's no answer to
yeah.
this solution.
It's
for
very
this problem.
I even with the aspect ratio, I know Chris was talking about the aspect ratio. Why is it 4:3? He was attended. I know he was attended.
That's just hilarious to me. I'm like, this is another instance. There's no reason for this to be like this, but it just is because he can. So whatever.
I think what he was going for. I heard something like an interview. He wanted these characters to feel so grand and epic. When you watch it, like something like in IMAX, you're seeing these characters as large figures. Just for that kind of like aesthetic to it is so awesome. You know, like BVS. The problem with BVS at that time is that it broke the mold of superhero movies. You know, MCU had their formula. They go in there, have a good time, jokes, heart. But over here, it's a little bit more like political. Religion is kind of brought up in BVS, which the religion part, the biggest things that holds it down for me. But it's very polarizing as it just kind of breaks the mold of superhero movies, how it's to be told. And I think in this movie, he's even with those movies, he has like, they always have good film quality. Like you're always getting some good like film stuff in there, like good dialogue, good pacing, good action scenes, good cinematography. I mean, God, he's so great with cinematography, visuals. But you're also getting in this movie a lot of good comic book stuff. You know, you're getting your characters seeing all your characters in a ensemble talk to each other, get like heroic moments, like Superman popping up, going against Steppenwolf. Those are the type of scenes that get the comic book fans going. You know, Batman with that epic line, I don't care how many people he has fought, he hasn't fought us together. You know, us united. That's such a great line, you know, and that's something that gets the fans going, you know, how the, like MCU movies get the fans going because MCU brings a lot of hype, right?
Pat.
Matt.
Oh,
sorry. I just want to say one last thing, and we'll definitely turn it over to Pat. Matt, I forgot I liked comic book movies until I watched the Snyder Cut. Because the moments, those two moments specifically, I was genuinely smiling for the first time while watching a superhero movie in a long time because I was like, wow, this feels earned. This doesn't feel forced. And you kind of forget that.
I like the opening.
Preface with movie also, not show, because you do like Still the Boys and Watchmen. So.
Yeah. Oh yeah, movies for sure. But I think comic book movies can be special. I mean, look at like what Nolan did with Batman. And I do want to correct my Rotten Tomatoes things. There are actually 2 movies in the 90s, Shazam and Wonder Woman. All the rest are 70s or below. And honestly, they only have 2 70 movies, and then the rest are like 40s, 50s, and 20s.
Yeah, I was about to say, both of which were not directed by Snyder, although one was produced. So, Pat, as the guy who has chiefly admitted that he is not the biggest comic book fan, you're more of a, You're more of a strict sci-fi and action guy. So what was it about this comic book movie that really kind of stood out and broke the mold from the rest of them? I know it doesn't help that a large majority of the rest of them have consisted of MCU and Disney properties, but like still, you know?
Well, I want to say that I think the comic book movies that are the most successful are the ones that sort of, learn from a different genre and then sort of, bring it into the comic book realm. I think Shazam is probably one of the best DC movies that there is. It's really bizarre that it was delayed until like March or April or something like that and played in the theater because it was 100% a Home Alone kids like Christmas blockbuster. And here I am watching it in April. Really bizarre.
Yeah.
But I will say that Shazam is quite possibly one of the best because it is sort of that, maybe nostalgia for me at this point. But it goes back to the 90s where it's basically a family Christmas movie. And I feel like the lessons, about family and, you decide who your family is and it's complicated and all that type of stuff. Those are really cool things that the audience can get behind. And it really doesn't have to do with the comic book world. It just happens to be a comic book character. I think Aquaman succeeds in this fashion because I think if you liked Nicolas Cage and National Treasure, you're going to like Jason Momoa in Aquaman. It's pretty much the same plot where they get a little clue and then they got to go find the next treasure and then they get another clue and they got to go whatever. And it's like they're taking from that genre of, like kind of family action. And then Logan, in the MCU is another one that basically, takes different genre and brings it into the comic book realm. And I think all three of those movies are successes, and I think it's because they're drawing energies from outside of what we normally know as the comic book realm. Going back to the Snyder Cut, I think this is sort of the grand epic sort of ensemble type movie, and I think it's just really it's 4 hours. You would think like, hey, does this like, am I wasting 2 hours or, whatever? But it's like, I'm actually engaged the whole time. There's enough going on. I just watched like the first hour again, cause I was basically just waiting for us to go live. And, it's like, I can nitpick and be like, okay, hey, when Wonder Woman shows up and stops the European terrorist, we probably don't even need that sequence. Because if you think about it, Steppenwolf shows up, he steals the mother box, and the Amazon say, shoot this arrow, and she'll know what it means. And that could have been her introduction, is like they shoot the arrow. Yeah. She's working in the art, and she sees this like newscast from CNN, and then there you go. And then you save about 15, 20 minutes on her introduction stopping terrorists. So there's certain things that you can nitpick that could have shortened this movie down. But overall, it's just a fun, epic movie. It brings these characters to life, and you can just sit back and relax and enjoy it.
Yeah, I hear you, Pat. I think this movie could have been, honestly, probably about 3 hours and 20 minutes. I think that's kind of
like an Irishman or like an Irishman length.
Yeah. But you know what? We actually got what we asked for. That's Snyder's style, those long setups where he paints a situation that, is a small character moment. We've seen Wonder Woman be badass before. I guess, although at that point in time, we had only really seen her in BVS.
Not to mention 2-minute action sequences stretch out into 10-minute action sequences because of the vast amount of slow-mo he uses.
Yeah. Right.
So we got what we asked for, and I guess there's the old adage of be careful what you wish for. Although I totally agree with you from like a critiquing standpoint, from a critic standpoint, a little unnecessary in regards to that. I think that Iris scene was very unnecessary. That could have been saved for the Flash solo film. But then again, there was a lot in here that I really don't know if I can go back and watch the original Justice League the same way.
I'm never watching it. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm never watching that piece of shit again.
Right. I mean, even with sorry to cut you guys off. Even with like the Wonder Woman, and then you got Flash saving Iris, it's kind of like it's heroic. They're doing heroic things, just saving people. So it's great to see that they have some heroic traits, some humanity type traits. But you got like one scene is a good example that I would have cut out is Aquaman is having an exchange with Batman, then he goes into the ocean, and then you get this like little. Not dialogue, but this whole singing sequence with these ladies, these foreign ladies. Like I would have, and then she grabs the coat.
That was really weird. That was weird.
Like I would have cut that out.
Confusing. But, I'm like, okay, this could have gotten cut.
But do you guys think that those moments are what we like in Snyder, though? In the same time,
those specific ones.
It's like
Well, I feel like we'd have to nitpick each and every single individual moment.
That is true.
In order to give a more accurate statement on that. I think it just depends on like certain things, but yeah, it's like you said, he's a polarizing filmmaker.
Yeah, and you taught me that, honestly. And it's the thing about it is it's like it's hard to ask anything to come out of this film because unless magically they walk into a room, shake hands, and make up for all of the craziness that's gone on the past 4 years, like we will never pretty much, again, more than likely 99.99% chance, right, see this Snyder with these characters again. So it sucks, like we got what we asked for and now it's over.
Although the one thing I will say is that, look, I get that like artists hate having their art critiqued. It's why kind of this whole thing exists, but I know Barry can travel through time, but does that excuse why Iris is dressed like a 1950s housewife? Like, what? I was so confused. That's like the only, of all the bullshit that, like, again, not bullshit, but like, of all the things that happened in this movie that kind of made me like raise my eyebrows and be like, huh, why is this in there? That was probably even with the singing Aquaman, like I said, that scene was so short that I'm like, okay, I already forgot about it. But what, like with Iris, I'm like, God, I'm like, Snyder, I'm like, this is not Watchmen. This is not 1985. Like, this is, so when he shot this, like, what the hell? Like, why does he do this? He did the same thing with, like, Carla Gugino with, like, almost every time she's in one of his movies. Like, it's just Snyder's... I'm just chalking that up to that's just a thing that Snyder does because Snyder doesn't care about regular human beings. He only likes portraying people as like these larger than life figures, like all the Spartans in 300, the Watchmen characters who are supposed to be real people, but then they can all of a sudden do like Matrix like fight moves, and Guardians of the Gahul, which is one of the most visually unnecessary but awesome movies ever made. I don't even get me fucking started on Sucker Punch in that movie, because that movie will take like an entire other podcast just to explain what that one's about. But like, he just does not care about regular people. He just wants everyone to be like these cooler and larger than life figures. And I now finally, that was something that always pissed me off before, but I now finally understand what it is that people like about that, because when it comes to applying that to these types of characters, it actually works, because that's what these types of characters are. You know, we've seen so many deconstructive superhero things in recently that you almost forget that, yeah, these guys are supposed to be larger than life. These are comic book figures, specifically the Justice League, who are very clearly modeled after the Olympian, you know, the Olympian gods. It's like, it's not too much of a disservice to say that they should be kind of portrayed like this. And it really, only someone like Snyder, with his very specific visual taste and his shooting style, could pull this off. And I did also want to get into Cyborg, but like, before we do, like do you guys have anything to add to that? Or
I think I'm gonna add to this right here. It's kind of like he let the narrative speak for itself. He doesn't really like having the characters speak. He likes the narrative kind of go with the go in.
One of
and
the last true visual storytellers.
Yeah, it's visual storytelling. It's for a perfect example, you get the whole backstory of the gods, you know, the humans, the Atlanteans, the Amazonians finding Darkseid, or Uke-6. He's like a younger Darkseid, fighting him. And then you get like at the end, Darkseid sees those are the previous gods. Now he's seeing the new gods, right? The Flash, Aquaman, Wonder Woman, Batman, Superman. They're all gods. They're gods among us. And I really like his take of treating these characters with so much respect of how powerful they are, because they're not people with bows and arrows and pistols like, you know, some other team, or, you know, they go green and sometimes they don't go green. So I do like that. Yeah, I'll pretty much add to that right there.
No, I mean, I totally feel you, Matt. I think that's kind of why I've always been more gravitated towards, or rather pulled towards, the DC universe, because, you know, like, they don't just set up a character in the beginning of the film that's like this villain from the comics, but he's a smaller villain, and then they just, you know, knock him down, get him out of the way, and now we're back to worrying about Thanos. Like, all the decisions seem to matter in this universe. And granted, it does fall on a lot of tropes that other superhero films fall on, but I do think they carved out their own specific, unique section. At least, you know, look at how the reception of the Snyder Cut's been, like, as proof and validation of that. They were on to something. They just needed to stick with it, because I mean, just look at, like, you know, Steppenwolf. I mean, he was awesome in this film, and complex. Yeah. And what Snyder was able to do by showing us Darkseid, but, you know, not having him step through that portal, that sort of like through line that just so naturally was there. Whereas with the MCU, I always felt it was like, well, we got to force this character in this film because him and Tony are friends now and they have a cool little cute back and forth that everyone likes. It just felt so organic. So I'm just, you know, sort of backing what you and Dom were saying about him just being a great visual storyteller. I mean, just seeing Darkseid and getting those 4 or 5 lines already were so much more impactful in that last act for me than just anything in that last act for the original cut, which, again, I still don't bash Joss Whedon at all. I would not want that job, even if it was like, I finally am going to work in the film industry. Like, that's not the first job I want to take. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So let's talk about Cyborg. So Cyborg, obviously, again, is a character that has gone through a lot of changes, just his comic book character. You know, obviously, I feel like when myself and a lot of other people were introduced to him, he was a member famously of the Teen Titans on that one of the greatest animated shows ever made, that animated Teen Titans show that ran from 2003 to 2006, which is absolutely perfect, and I will not hear a word against that show. Then, obviously, again, I read the New 52 comics, and I'm like, oh, why is Cyborg the 7th member of the Justice League here and not Martian Manhunter? What's going on here? But I kind of went along with the ride, and it was actually pretty cool seeing him as a member of the League, and that kind of, like, became his function. So, obviously, when I heard that they were going to make Cyborg the latest member of the League, this is going way back, like, to when they were first announcing who was going to be in the movie. I'm like, okay, so they got to get Flash, got to get Aquaman. Oh, they're not doing Green Lantern, but at the time, I'm like, yeah, because I, you know, obviously I wasn't in, like, kind of like my studio thinking brain, but I'm like, yeah, because Green Lantern had just been a giant bomb for DC, so they wanted to get as much distance from that movie as possible, and they were putting in Cyborg. I'm like, okay, cool. So obviously the movie comes out, and the initial cut it's very clear. Again, Cyborg, I don't think the idea of Cyborg having nothing to do in that movie is completely accurate, but needless to say, he doesn't have as much to do in comparison to this movie. And then in the months leading up to the release of, specifically of the Snyder Cut, Ray Fisher, the actor, goes on this tangent on Twitter, basically calling out Joss Whedon, calling out Warner Brothers, saying, yeah, Joss Whedon didn't give my character, basically, for lack of a better word, calling out Joss Whedon for saying that he was racially prejudiced against his character, and obviously, calling out Warner Brothers for enabling him. That eventually led to the string of tweets that obviously came out from the Buffy the Vampire Slayer cast members, obviously accusing Whedon of negligence and just overall, just really terrible attitudes that affected people on the set of that. That's kind of all here nor there as far as the actual accuracy of those statements. But the one thing that became immediately clear to me upon watching this movie, as far as Ray Fisher's beef with Joss Whedon, if you will, and Warner Brothers for enabling him, is, obviously it becomes apparent. He cut all his goddamn scenes, specifically his juicy scenes, considering that he is the goddamn freaking linchpin of this movie. It's so funny because, again, this really just goes into just kind of my shock from seeing this movie, which I've never seen a situation where it's like, okay, how much are they actually going to add and improve on this character when he seemingly did the thing? His role is he's their connection to the mother boxes because a mother box was used in order to make him. So therefore, he's going to intrinsically understand more about these things than anyone else. Wonder Woman is kind of informs Batman about the history of Darkseid and his interference in the universe and his original fight from eons ago against the old gods. But now, obviously, Cyborg is that next step as far as, again, he's the guy who saves the whole world in a sense. Obviously, Flash does too in this sense, but he's the linchpin of the movie. He's got the best arc, in my opinion. He's got some of the most crushing scenes, obviously, with his initial accident and then the scenes with his father. So again, I'm not saying that Ray Fisher was was unjust. So now it's becoming clear that I don't think Ray Fisher, I think probably Ray Fisher wasn't using the right wordage as far as why he was so mad at Joss Whedon, but it definitely becomes a lot more clear considering what his character was, the purpose that his character was originally supposed to serve. And I gotta say, I was really freaking impressed because Cyborg was easily my favorite part of the movie. Ray Fisher gave the best performance of everyone in this movie. His character was easily the most interesting. Talk about it. This shit he was fucking awesome in this.
He was fucking amazing. I mean, God, he was so heartbreaking. His dad too, Victor Stone, he was great too. The whole character arc of, him being alone. I like the scene where it's kind of it's like a, what's the best word for this? I don't have a good word for it. Kind of missing it, but of course he's not there for his football games. He's the captain of the football team. He's a quarterback. He's winning games, and then his dad was never there. But you see him coming in right in the Stark Labs, and he's coming in with his new team, the Justice League. And Victor Stone has that sign of approval, yes, you guys go ahead, you guys do your thing because I know this is important. It's like a sign of approval, and then Cyborg also says, okay, they kind of have that respect for each other now because, of course, he feels kind of like you made me a monster. I should have died. I'm look at me. You call this he's kind of giving up on the world. Of course, it's one of his. It was pretty surprising hearing him say "fuck the world." It's I was expecting an F-bomb. I don't know from who. I know, of course, Batman, but Cyborg, that was pretty interesting. So Cyborg was great. Ray Fisher was great. He was awesome. I think the whole kind of that whole I would say a couple characters in here, as we're talking about cinematic universe and stuff, needed a movie before this. Batman and Flash, I still believe they needed a movie before this one, maybe Man of Steel 2. But Cyborg is his perfect origin. You know what I'm saying? This is the perfect movie for him to be introduced because he's really connected to the mother boxes. He kind of is one of the mother boxes. So yeah, man, they did great on freaking Ray Fisher. He killed in this movie, and I need more from Ray Fisher.
Yeah, honestly, it really sucks that he'll probably again because of how hard he went after Warner Brothers. I wouldn't surprise if I see him blacklisted by the rest of Hollywood, which would fucking suck. Because if anything, it's wow, finally we actually have a performance to base this guy off of, and he fucking crushed it. So I mean, Pat, your thoughts on that?
I think Cyborg is one of the characters that is a gold mine for the DC universe. Pretty much, I'm conflicted because Doom Patrol portrays that character so well as well. But it's two different cyborgs. It's definitely a multiverse type situation here, where each one is perfect, but they're not the same. So it's definitely a great character. I think it's anytime they explore it, it's so far been pretty fantastic. My one thing with Cyborg is I was all in on it. I want more. Like, that's what I've been saying the whole time tonight. It would have been awesome to sort of, instead of having this like, Avatar Onitanium type moment with the mother boxes and the Unity, those are kind of like BS words that are just there to simplify things for the audience. You could have started with Cyborg and being created in this alien technology, give it some pseudoscience name, and then it's like, sure, simplify it that the aliens are calling it the mother box later on. But I feel like you could have really just gone all in on Cyborg, cut out like 30, 40 minutes of other characters and just give it to, Ray Fisher. So that's my opinion. I wanted to see basically at least a third of this movie be a Cyborg origin movie.
Yeah, particularly, especially since Aquaman's entire arc really did just seem like set up for the solo Aquaman movie.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with pretty much everything you guys are saying, especially Matt when he was like, I don't feel I need the origin story of Cyborg because we got it in this. And I think that speaks to a larger sort of point that I've been trying to really make, and it's a great example. Yes, Marvel has this formula that has millions, billions, maybe even infatuated, but there's another way to do big team up films. I mean, we literally had an origin story inside of a film where, hey, that secondary character who we started the film off with, where in a Marvel film would stay the secondary character and only years later get a Disney Plus show to flesh them out. We were able to do that. And it's because we had different voices and different opinions that were able to surface through and sort of enrich another very similar thing, superhero films, but just another side of the aisle, because obviously you have, DC and Marvel, the two big names. And to me, it's just unfortunate that I don't know. I mean, I would love for us, like a psychiatrist, to honestly do a study on this, because it's like we want so many different things, yet we only seem to support with our dollars Marvel to keep going. And yet when we finally get something different and interesting, and I know in this situation it's different because people are receiving this film well, although it still doesn't have the highest Rotten Tomato score. And of course, Snyder, the door's already closed, but like, we had Man of Steel, which I thought was a really good film, a really solid setup to an extended universe. We then had, another solid film in Wonder Woman. And at that point in time, like, it was still pretty early. We could have saved this ship, but yet the dollars kept voting for the formula and, the breadcrumb trail that they knew how to follow, because God forbid we get lost in the woods and stumble upon something interesting. It's very frustrating seeing sort of how this film could have, if handled the right way, changed the landscape of a genre I want to love. I have so many comics in my room. I've read so many comics throughout my life, but I just feel so disenfranchised with comic movies, and it's getting to be television, although Falcon and Winter Soldier was a great debut, because of just, man, all these comics have different writers, and you can read one Batman run in Rebirth, another in New 52, and it's like two different Batmans that you could love if you can appreciate the different voices, yet we just want this congealed same thing all the time, and it's just. But before we get too far away from Cyborg, I wanted to read some of the chat, because the chat actually has some good points about Cyborg. Jay says he was very happy and satisfied for the Cyborg story. It felt complete, and Ray Fisher was on point. Yeah, Jay, I think we all hear you on that. Luke said Cyborg was really cool, and he didn't know anything about him outside of Justice League. Okay.
That's a good title, actually.
That's pretty good.
Luke may be onto something right there. There's Zack Snyder's Justice League, and then there's Justice League. I like that. I like that a lot.
And this was hilarious. I really had to fight back laughing. We definitely should ask Cyborg to raise our subscriber count.
Right?
Right.
Come on, dude. Get on that.
Can we have the same kind of... Oh, sorry. What were you saying, Matt?
And that's kind of, sorry to budge in, but I think that's kind of like the cool thing about Cyborg, right? It's like these heroes, they have the powers to do anything you want. You talk about Victor Stone telling them you can launch nuclear codes and within a second, right? But he has the good heart, the good responsibility of not doing that, not choosing that. And I really like stuff like that, because it comes for more of the heart, mental of being the good person instead of going the bad side. And he maybe he needed some characters to kind of like push him, like Wonder Woman, get back in the world, right? So
And it
Their
doesn't do the
chemistry's
Marvel
great.
thing where it's snappy and makes you feel stupid for like, oh, thinking that these guys do anything other than the superhero thing. Huh? You're dumb
Yeah.
for thinking that just with a snappy one-liner like the Tony Stark nuclear code that he dropped in Age of Ultron. I'm realizing there are a lot of similarities between Age of Ultron and Justice League now, as this is
Russian
recently
family,
quoted
yeah.
by our good friend Luke. But yeah, I wanted to bring up the one last point before we. Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I just thought while we were focusing on one character, I kind of want everyone's opinion here on, like, can we, I know we touched upon him loosely, but I just, like, what did everyone, like, I want everyone's breakdown of the Ezra Miller Flash now that we actually know what they were going for and that we will still get a film.
Yeah.
We
I don't
think
know
at
from
least.
the director of It Chapter 2 though.
Because we're going to see more of this Flash and now we know him. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So
It
what do you guys
seems
think?
like
Don't know if that changes my thoughts on Ezra Miller though. Is the
Right, that's
problem
totally
there.
fine, for
That's
sure.
a whole different. That's a whole different podcast though.
He just doesn't look like a superhero to me, right? He just looks kind of like a little skinny, no nerdy kid that I could care less about. He just
I was
doesn't
talking
look
Ezra
heroic.
Miller as the person, not his casting.
Yeah, Ezra Miller just to me just doesn't feel like the Flash, especially the Barry Allen Flash. But here he's pretty damn solid. I mean, you got some nice. You know, what's the great thing about his character is that he's throwing in jokes and they feel kind of organic. I was kind of like surprised, like, damn, this is a funny Zack Snyder movie. What? He's putting some humor into this, and it came organic. It came in the right times, and he was the only character to really make those jokes. I kind of hate it sometimes in these superhero movies. Everyone needs to crack jokes. Justice League was kind of a perfect example. Batman cracking cheesy jokes, like it just takes away from their characters.
Yeah, why did you just spend like 5 minutes talking about brunch? It's like, bruh, no one cares that much.
Yeah,
No,
and,
I promise you, anyone who has ever cared that much about brunch doesn't care anymore after this monologue.
That was horrible. And also too is like you can really go off something, right? He goes into the Flash, the Speed Force. You know, the next movie can be about, oh, look at, I discovered the powers and it actually work. Maybe I could go back in time and go save my mother. So that's a good way to kind of lead into that, toward that movie. But supposedly Justice League is canon and this is not. So
Ugh, that's so disappointing,
we'll see.
especially considering like, like I said, I just wanted Zack Snyder to. I can't believe I'm saying this now, but I officially want Zack Snyder to just direct every movie in the DC. And could you imagine a live action Flashpoint directed by Zack Snyder? I haven't nerded out
awesome.
this. I have not nerded out this hard probably since I heard that we were getting Infinity War. But considering how much I love that comic and I love that animated movie, and after seeing this movie, my mind is exploding with the possibilities of that. But before we wrapped up and get out of here, I wanted to bring up one last point. One last point that I think is interesting because it kind of ties into our point at the front. So, Chris, you and I have been talking about the last couple weeks about kind of the discourse that surrounds the movie and how it always seems to trump the actual movie itself. But what's interesting is this might be the first time where the discourse, or in this case, the story of the movie, actually does reflect the movie itself in a weird way. I still don't firmly believe in the idea that that should ever dictate someone's opinion on the movie, mostly because it's been doing it far too often recently. But at the end of the day, I think regardless of any of our thoughts on it, the story of this movie is going to be Zack Snyder returning to a project that he originally left for just awful, tragic reasons that no one should ever have to go through and salvage and get to make the movie that he originally wanted to make after the studio system failed him so hard. You know, that's the story of this movie, regardless of anything else. So I was just wondering, like, the effects of that. Obviously, again, this movie had tremendous legs for years on end before it was actually released. But I feel like it is worth actually having a discussion about that discourse because it's probably one of the only times ever where, again, something positive actually came out of something that, frankly, was a gigantic mess, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I still think it sets a terrible precedent
I
for the
agree.
relationship
I agree.
between artist and fan. I mean, just look at the Grammys, for example. You know, somewhere around 2010, the first rock album without electric guitars in it won Album of the Year, and then since then we have 90 categories that are essentially just the pop category, but we can't fit all the pop artists into the 5 that get nominated for Album of the Year. So we'll start chipping away and destroying the value of other genres like jazz and blues and folk and you know, R&B that are amazing in their own right, because we have some pop artists who borrow slightly from that and they sell more records. And so it all just becomes the same thing with just a tinge of what was once an amazing like roots reggae scene, which was so unique and beautiful in its own way. And it dilutes the art and the creative process. And so I don't want this like, oh God, Patty Jenkins freaking out because they hated Wonder Woman 84 and now just playing appeasement in her next film. No, channel that. Use that to make the best damn film you can make for your final one. Do not cave. I think that's what this really... I'm glad, obviously, tremendously glad Snyder got his redemption. I mean, that's literally amazing. That is one of the beautiful things about the internet, and that's why this is a double-edged sword. Because on one hand, you're able to defeat something terrible that happened to him and give him some sort of like positivity to walk out of that terrible section of his life with, and who's not happy about that? But on the other hand, man, I think it sets a terrible precedent, and I think we're going to reap what we sow. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Warner Bros. Seems like a studio that they just kind of going off what are the critics saying? You know, what is the Rotten Tomatoes saying? And they're just, I mean, they do reshoots on something like Suicide Squad was reshot. You know, Justice League, we got something like that, and they're kind of going into that formula. It's just bad. It's like a studio. I just don't want to work with Warner Bros. Because I feel like if they don't like my vision, they're just gonna axe me off like they did to Snyder, and that's not good. You gotta trust your guns, Warner Bros, and go with Snyder, because he, at the end of this movie, you could tell he had a story, he had it planned out, he knew where he was going. It was fucking crazy. It's insane. It is different.
All right, and Pat.
Yes, Snyder cut all the way. You know, watching this movie and understanding like how good this 4-hour cut was. Specifically the fact that we got rid of the Russian family that everybody had to save.
Oh yeah,
in the original thing. I was basically praying that would be cut out, and I got my wish. So amen, Snyder. But you know, the main thing is
that one reason alone for cutting out the Russian family. Amen, Snyder.
You didn't like her using the bug spray?
No, none of it was necessary.
Like
it was
lifting the building and making Flash look like a fucking joke. You didn't miss that?
No, not at all. Because the movie was not about, you know, saving some bystanders. It's about saving the whole entire planet. And it's like, if you don't stop the unity, then you don't actually save anybody. So,
but Pat, he killed people in Man of Steel and Batman vs Superman, and people didn't like it.
I don't know, whatever. It's dark movies actually can be good. You know, be willing to you know, give it a shot is what I'll say. But for the most part, I think after watching this and enjoying it so much, all I want to see is the rest of the Snyder take on Justice League. You know, whatever was prepared for part 2 and 3. I know you told me about the treatment, and you know, like told everybody to go kind of take a look at it. But you know, it's like I'm interested. I'm actually intrigued. I want to see that go forward. And I think the fact that the Justice League cut is sort of canon, I don't even know why that has to be. Like, you know, just drop, you know, if you're going to drop the Snyder cut, just drop both movies and do your own thing.
Yeah.
Like
they're doing the multiverse
over
with the Flash. So like, why not? You know,
they don't know what they're doing.
They really don't. They really don't.
I think with the Flashpoint, that movie will end with a giant question mark, you know, and then they'll
quite literally, he'll end up back on the island from Lost in the middle of the question mark.
Jeez.
Yeah.
But they'll be able to hopefully reboot whatever they're trying to do from there. And, you know, I think Marvel with, you know, going into the Scarlet Witch, the WandaVision, and, you know, the Winter Soldier stuff, and really taking on streaming service and all this, you know, TV series. You know, I read an article that DC was sort of going to follow suit and sort of start competing even more in that arena. So it's like, is the, you know, the movie TV sort of model changing, and DC's sort of going to, you know, follow the trend? And how does that really impact? Is there room for more Snyder, considering the movie trends? And maybe the answer is no. Maybe that's why they're moving on.
I think that if there's one thing that we can say in summation for all this, it's that just don't trust Warner Brothers. Like, oh my, everything you guys have just said about like now they're going to try and copy Disney again as far as mixing their TV and their movie properties. I can only imagine what new door of possibilities has been opened up for them to fuck up even more. Because, oh man, as we said with Warner Brothers, their seeming mission for these last 5 years now since Batman vs Superman has been, what, the dumbest thing that we just did? How can we make that dumber? And they just do by pure accident too, by not even trying. It's like they trip and fall down the stairs, and there's just another set of stairs that's waiting for them. I don't know how many accidental metaphors I could come up with off the top of my head. And forgetting Warner Brothers for a second, look, they lost for once, or in this case, they won, because guess what? They got more subscribers on HBO Max from this one thing than probably everything else, because the only reason, let's face it, as much as the fans can pat themselves on the back, the real reason why Warner Brothers greenlit this was because they botched the release of HBO Max, release of HBO Max so badly that they needed like an initial jump, and this was like kind of the Kickstarter that they needed, and we'll see how that bodes well for them. But as far as my final thoughts, Justice League, or should I say Zack Snyder's Justice League, was a very much welcome surprise, a refreshing take in a genre that has become largely oversaturated and is kind of taking over and seeping into areas where I wouldn't want it to, and was just honestly a really, really great redemption for a very polarized director who has had way too much tragedy happen in his personal life. And with that, I give this movie 4 out of 5 stars.
Yeah, I feel that. I think the only thing that I honestly can look back on with the Whedon cut now is, or Justice League, as Luke brought to our attention, is the fact that really all he did was, by mandate, whittle down Snyder's story to, to an hour and 59 minutes and 59 seconds exactly, to really just reshoot scenes or add scenes that just get the basic bullet points of what Snyder had, which speaks to Snyder's vision, in my opinion. The only scene I really miss is that scene where Batman fights that little moth guy on the roof the first time, because I thought it actually sort of spoke to, they smell fear. And so that's how, Steppenwolf was sort of able to navigate throughout the film. I thought that was actually kind of a good bit of explanation, but I get why Snyder only wanted to put in scenes that he shot. But so with all this being said, man, and now knowing about them following the Disney precedent, this movie, I actually leave feeling sadder than I did starting this podcast tonight, because I'm not confident that this is going to have a positive impact on the industry, an impact that sort of says, hey, maybe we're a little too homogenized, and maybe it's time for us to sort of let people sort of think for themselves again as far as being creators go. And I know that social media is very impactful, and it really does hurt to get those bad Rotten Tomato review numbers, but we also need to think about how films age. Look at how The Force Awakens has been getting beaten to death. It was once a highly revered film, and now it's sort of a laughingstock. And because it was so in its moment, so childish with its humor, and just not a film that it lives more than the 3 months it's in theaters. So it sucks, because this isn't going to set the precedent I want it to set. In fact, I think it's actually going to get worse from here. But I am glad that Snyder got his redemption, and I did love this film. Really, really loved it. So yeah, 4 out of 5, but it's bittersweet, because nothing's going to change, and it's not going to get better as far as my personal tastes go and my hope for art. Honestly, just art.
Yeah, I get it. Matt.
Final thoughts here. This is an amazing, like I said, amazing comic book movie. Very much so a fun one. The 4 hours didn't feel like 4 hours to me. I think the pacing was great in this movie. Personally, there are some things I'll cut off, but the pacing still was flying by. And to end it off, the fans won. We got this cut. This cut was never supposed to happen, according to Warner Bros., and it happened. So us fans are the ones who really control the market. And I know probably some fans are going to start boycotting, future DC movies to get this back. That's whatever they want to do. Whatever. I'm still going to go ahead and go check them out. But fans are the real winners here. And if I have to give a grade, I will give it a 4.5 for Zack Snyder's Justice League.
And Pat, your DEFCON rating. Well, what? It's back. It's back. Let's hear it.
Yeah, this is, I think, very complicated, because for the most part, in terms of Snyder's vision, he basically safely goes in at a 5. In terms of like Warner Brothers and what's next for DC, I'm going to have to say that we're probably at 1. I'm worried for what's going on. The new Suicide Squad movie is sort of like, maybe that's some good sign, if it actually is as good as the hype is, that might be like a good sign that Warner Brothers might, have a future making comic book movies. So we'll see. I'm kind of nervous because, Snyder did such a good job with this cut. and pretty much all the news, all the whispers is that we're moving away from this. And we really don't know what direction we're going to give. So maybe not DEF CON 1, because that means we need to all go watch the Great British Bake Off. But let's put it at DEF CON 2 for the DC Universe.
I thought that was only for the Mandalorian. I thought that was only for the Mandalorian. I didn't realize that applied across the board to everything.
If we ever get to DEF CON 1, then we'll just start watching the Great British Bake Off and give up on everything.
Got it.
I love that.
All right. So with that being said, thank you guys once again. This was our Snyder Cut panel. We had an absolute blast talking about it, breaking down this movie, breaking down again that even though Snyder may have won, Warner Brothers is far from done fucking up and fucking our future favorite characters and prospects in movies overall. So what did you guys think of the Snyder Cut? Let us know in the comment section below. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. Click the bell next to it. That way you guys can get notified every time we put up new content every Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Make sure you follow our fantastic guests here. Patrick W. Huber on Instagram, at Basic Entertain on Instagram and YouTube. And of course, you can follow us on our social medias at Talkin' TV Podcast on Facebook and Instagram in order to keep track of what we're posting on a daily basis. Chris, where can the good people find you?
Yeah, you guys can find me at Christian Evanko. Evanko is the spelling on that. I have another podcast. I am making music, and I've been pretty intensely making music lately, getting back to my first love, not my only love, but my first love. And it feels good to have a nice balance in my creativity. So, yeah, you guys can hit the link in my bio on Instagram. All my projects are there. You can get a taste from my past music. And, hey, there might be a little hint in the end screen here as to what's to come. But at Christian Evanko, if you want more on that little mystery. Dom, let's have the guests tell them where they one last time where they can find them.
One last time, guests. Where can the good people find you guys?
You guys can find me at Basic Entertainment here on YouTube. Of course, I do, as everyone else is doing, movie reviews, reactions. Spoiler Talk is one of a series I brought in. I'm gonna have a Spoiler Talk show tomorrow at 1:30 Pacific time, 4:30 Eastern, of course, for the Zack Snyder Justice League with a big panel. Cannot wait for that. And you guys, if you guys want to stay covered with the movie news, rumors of geeky movies, and the big blockbusters, go ahead and follow my Instagram at Basic Entertain. That's at Basic Entertain. Thank you guys for having me on. Of course, I was like I text Chris like, I need to be on this panel. I freaking love this movie. And yeah, thank you guys so much for this.
Of course, fun to have you on. And Pat, where can the good people find you?
Yeah, it's I always direct everybody to my Instagram, just at Patrick W. Huber, and check it out. It's maybe I'll add a photo on there one day. No, I'm just joking, but I'm working on some stuff, basically in the works. It might take me a couple weeks to get up and going, but for now, just check out my Instagram, and if you like what photos I'm taking, expect more in the future.
All right, excellent. So the only thing that I have left to say is I think we figured out ultimately tonight. Look,
watch more Snyder movies, right?
Watch more Snyder movies, exactly. Yeah, the Snyder Cut has been released. 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.